welcome to another edition of Mennonite Heritage Village at Home, our attempt to bring the museum home to you. And we want to do that through a series of different videos, and this is part of that. My name is Patrick Friesen. I'm the development coordinator at the museum, and I'm really excited to be a host as part of this. This week on the show, I'm going to have an interview with Erin Koop Unger. She is a board member at the museum, as well as a writer and blogger at Manitoba. You'll hear more about that later on. I'll also be treated to a song by quartet, and the song is In the Rifted Rock, I'm Resting. So I hope you really enjoy that. Haley's back for another Mental Health Minute, and at the end, Andrea is going to be talking about our sawmill and its role in terms of how Mennonites responded to the war effort through conscientious objection. And we're excited to have that as part of what we're doing here. I hope you really enjoy this video, and let's get right to it. Here's my conversation with Erin.
Welcome back to Mennonite Heritage Village at Home, and today our special guest is Erin Koop Unger, and it's so good to have you with us. Give a little bit of background. Erin is a travel history writer, I think is a good way to say it. She's created the website Manitoba.com. There's going to be a link in the description, so you can go and check it out. She grew up in the Steinbach area and now serves as one of the board members here at the Mennonite Heritage Village. And so we're excited to have her serving here at the village, but also excited that you can join for this interview. So, Erin, let's start off with how did you end up writing a Mennonite history blog? Like, how did that whole thing start?
Well, it began with a travel blog. Sort of a travel blogging existential crisis, I think of it as, because my husband Andrew and I like to travel to different countries overseas every year, and so we saw all these interesting things as what the world has to offer, like a bunch of things, and I'm a little clumsy and shy about talking about about them, so I began blogging as a way to practice communicating these experiences. But it seemed like the more I tried to explain what I had seen or learned about in other countries, other cultures, it felt ridiculous because I just kept thinking that I don't even know my own culture or background very well. Like, just because I'm from here, it's easy for me to assume that I know all this stuff, my culture, my background. But somehow with this process of trying to write about other cultures, it hit home that I wouldn't even know what to say about my own history and culture, really. So how could I hope to understand other cultures? So I became more curious about my own home, family history, cultural history, began reading the Historical Atlas of the East Reserve. I found that, and that led me to nearby sites that are directly related to my own family history, and all these discoveries were amazing to me, and began reading history books, family history books, learning fascinating stories about my ancestors. So the more I read and learned, the more curious I became and needed a place to process this. And so for me, that was turning the travel blog over into Manitoba.
Well, that's really neat. Yeah, I've gone there a couple times to look at some of the different things. You also have lots of links on there to a whole bunch of other places to find out about Mennonite history, to be able to get more access. It's not just a blog, but you have a lot of different information on there. And I'll let our viewers go and peruse even the recipes and a few other things that you can find there. What's a fascinating find that you've made about Mennonites in Manitoba through this process? Like, what has been something that you've been able to really cling on to?
Yeah, something that really grabbed me, honestly, because I'm still kind of considering myself in the beginning of my learning, and so for me, it was learning about the villages. Now, the MHV, Mennonite Heritage Village, it's a village, it's a model of these villages, and that whole time, all my life, the MHV existed, and I knew about it, but I didn't really understand, like somehow didn't connect. Like, I didn't realize that this was a model of the villages that had once been all over the place here. Yeah, there had been so many little street villages all over what is now the RMs of Hanover, Stanley, Rhineland. And it's interesting to me, like I was learning about this, which the fact that the Mennonite settlers of the 1870s, they transplanted their ancient way of life on the Russian steppe to the prairies of Manitoba. And I found this so fascinating because it's all they knew. So of course, that's why they did it. And most of these villages, they didn't last, they dissolved. And that makes it almost more fascinating to me too, finding the sites of these abandoned villages. I mentioned the Historical Atlas of the East Reserve. That helped me find these. That really gave me this. It showed me. That's where I learned this information. So finding the sites of these abandoned villages is like finding a link to the land across the ocean, like finding someone else's memory. Like this idea really captured me. Yeah.
That's cool. Now, I noticed that you featured some different cemeteries that you've discovered along the way. What are some of the connections? What are some of the lessons that cemeteries provide for us, for the living, for those of us who are living?
Well, I think there's two. In the older cemeteries, we often see that a large percentage of the stone markers are for babies and children. And seeing that, just seeing it right there, like I'm like, whoa, there's so many for, like, some will just say baby, and seeing all those children's graves is quite shocking. And we don't see children die at that rate anymore. And I think that has a lot to do with vaccinations, which decrease the infant mortality rate. So there's a lesson there. And we also see a lot of deaths in 1918, which was when the Spanish flu pandemic was sweeping across the planet. And we know that Mennonites in Manitoba died at a greater rate than other groups because they were not very good at social distancing. They were so connected. So I think there are some lessons to be learned in these two facts that we.
Wow. Yeah. Definitely. I know this past weekend, even in the midst of the cold, then my wife and I went out for a little bit of a drive, and we visited two different cemeteries. One was just because my wife had never been to the old Gortys church, and so we visited there, and the seminary or cemetery there, and then we went to the Kleefeld Cemetery where my grandparents are buried. And so went and saw where they were buried as well, but and two very different, one kind of stark out in the middle of the prairies, and I don't know, I would say proudly boasting, but the since 1874, which is a pretty significant date there, one of the oldest cemeteries, and then to the Kleefeld one, which is kind of tucked into this, the EMC cemetery there is tucked into some bush, and so it's very sheltered and completely different kind of connections there. But that's good. Too often in history, women have received a diminished role in the stories that are told. Is there a particular story about Mennonite women that stands out to you?
Yeah, there are not enough stories told about women. I think they're often because they were not recorded as being, leadership of many organizations where records are being kept and whatnot. And I feel like most stories that are told, this is a personal feeling of mine. I feel like they're often robbed of a lot of power. They feel edited to me. I really doubt that all women were so meek and as these stories of everyone's grandmothers make them out to be. So I'm always looking for things that I'm like, really, like that's, I don't know. So I think we can definitely do more to look into that. My favorite story that I've come across was from reading in Preservings, and I can't I don't remember which issue it was, so I don't remember the names, but I know it happened during the 1874 journey from South Russia to Manitoba. And so they're in the middle of Europe. They'd stop for the night. They're in transit. They're in a European country they've never been to before. One couple was going for a walk. A thief approaches them, and the wife fought him off. She would have none of that. She took action. She scared him away. I forget if she outright slapped him or what, but she just immediately, like, the guy ran away. And yeah, I just love that story, and I wish I could remember the name of her, but it's somebody who immigrated here in 1874 who did this. She was her husband was with her, but she was the one who was like, "Get out of here," you know, to the thief. Yeah, and another way I could answer this question is by considering my own family too. I feel that my grandmother and great grandmother, both of whom I knew, were very strong women, and I would say they were not passive, they were not quiet, they were probably not especially humble, and I don't feel that they wanted me to be those things either. I don't know. That's just sort of what I took away from that. And it's different than the usual Mennonite narrative, but this is just what I experienced. So this is what makes me wonder every time somebody says that their grandmother just sort of sat there and was really nice. And I'm like, that's all really? Like, no, I think there's more. One of my parents' favorite stories, when I demonstrated what some might call mouthiness or sass, as young children might, was when we were visiting my great grandmother, and my great uncle was trying to make me stop eating candy, and I just turned to him and I said, "Well, do you live here?" Like, I was like, "I'm not listening to you." And my great grandmother just beamed with pride, like that I told him what was up. Like, nobody tried to tell me to be nicer. Like, like just that idea that like a young female can just be like, "No, you don't get to say." I feel like there has to be more of that. I mean, this is my great grandmother who was okay with that and thought it was great. I feel like she wasn't the only one. So where are those stories?
Yeah. And we need to hear more of those as time goes on. And thinking of last week in the story that we had too of a woman who basically single parents these children. If you don't want, you go back to the video last week of Sarah Wall, and just that significance of what women endured, and yet also their significant role that they played in developing the culture and land. And so many of them have also been strongly influencing the arts and community within the Mennonites as well, which is also something that is overlooked. I know for myself, being fairly new into Mennonite Heritage Village, I've been absolutely astounded and just encouraged by seeing the stories that do come out of how particularly how culture and everything has been formed, how the arts have been formed in and through and predominantly by women, men as well, but by women throughout history and among the Mennonites. So you're currently serving on the board of the Mennonite Heritage Village. So it maybe makes you an expert. No, I don't know if an expert, but what is one feature of the museum or of the organization as a whole that you think should be given a bit more exposure?
Well, my favorite, it's so hard, Patrick, because just the entire experience is always so immersive at the MHV, and there may be something that different that jumps out every time. But for me, if I think of when I get to a certain place and I think, oh, this is my favorite place, like to be here. And I don't think it has a name, but it's the spot where there's gardens and the summer kitchen, and it's between the house and you're sort of moving in that direction. And one of the first times that I was at, I remember one time during a demonstration day or Pioneer Days, perhaps, the summer kitchen was actively alive with women baking in there. And so there was schnitzer coming out of here, and out of the bake oven was going on, and everything was happening. And it just, and after walking through the orchard, all of that kind of really brought back for me the experience of like just being on the farm and how my grandmother lived her life, and just what the experience was being there. And I just love how the MHV keeps that alive for me. So that's a personal aspect.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good. That's good. And the village has lots of different things to offer us. So thank you very, very much, Erin, for your time, and very grateful that you could join us. And those of you who want to know more, it is Manitoba, as in Menno, and then Toba at the end, .com. There's going to be a link in the description, so you can go there and check out Erin's website there. And we look forward to hearing more from you and through that website as well in the future. Thanks a lot, Erin.
Thank you.
In the rifted rock I'm resting, safely sheltered I abide. There no foes nor storms molest me, while within the cleft I hide. Now I'm resting, sweetly resting, in the cleft once made for me. Jesus, blessed rock of ages, I will hide myself in thee. Long pursued by sin and Satan, weary sat I, longed for rest. Then I found this heavenly shelter, opened in my Savior's breast. Now I'm resting, sweetly resting, in the cleft once made for me. Jesus, blessed rock of ages, I will hide myself in thee. Which passeth understanding, joy the world can never give. Now in Jesus I am finding, in his light of love I live. Now I'm resting, sweetly resting, in the cleft once made for me. Jesus, blessed rock of ages, I will hide myself in thee. Hide in thee.
We're back here with Haley Reimer Chaplin for a Mental Health Minute, and excited to be able to get a little bit of insight again. This time I'm sensing that you have something regarding our senses.
Yes, you know what? So often it's easy to feel stressed or anxious in these COVID times. And one really easy way for you to kind of gain your composure back is to kind of think about what you're experiencing. What is one thing that you can taste? What are two things that you can smell? What are three things that you can hear? What are four things that you can see? And what are five things that you can experience, feel through your sense of touch? Taste, smell, hearing, seeing, touch.
Well, thank you very much, Haley. And I need to get out there and be able to experience that. And you can do some of those things at MHV. That's always exciting. There's lots of things to even smell, especially if you go to.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So when we talk about Mennonites at war, a big part of that story is the story of conscientious objectors. And we're standing here in front of the Riding Mountain Sawmill. It's a piece of historic equipment that's located on our grounds here at Mennonite Heritage Village. And the historical importance of this sawmill is that it was the one used in Riding Mountain National Park for the conscientious objectors who were fulfilling their alternative service requirements at the park during World War II. The mill itself came to the museum in about 1972, and actually our current volunteer, Head Sawyer, his father was the one who orchestrated that move from the national park to the museum here. And so we have the sawmill. It's been functioning here at the museum since 1972. We generally use it for demonstration purposes on festival days, but we also use it to fulfill some of our building needs, to create building materials for us for projects that we need here around the grounds, including actually the peace exhibit where we've been at as well today. So the story of conscientious objectors and Mennonites in Canada goes back to 1873 when Mennonites first immigrated to Canada from Russia. And before they came to Canada, they got a charter of rights or a privilegium from the Canadian government, exempting them from a number of things, but included in that was exemption from military service. And so Mennonites in Canada had this promise from the federal government that they were exempt from service. When World War II came, complete exemption was no longer possible. And so Mennonites in Canada, both Ontario and in the Western provinces, negotiated with the government for the opportunity to perform alternative service for those claiming conscientious objector status. Eventually, about just under 11,000 young men, only men were conscripted, but young men claimed conscientious objector status. And of those, about 7,500 were Mennonites. So the vast majority were Mennonites and also Hutterites as well. But the vast majority were Mennonites. And so this is a story that impacts Mennonite history here in Canada quite a bit. So the story of COs in Canada during World War II starts with the National Registration and Mobilization Act in 1940. And at that point, all the young men between 16 and 60 years of age were required to register with the government. Mennonites had lots of objections against that. Eventually, a lot of them did register. And a lot of them claimed CO status, but actually starting only in 1941 were provisions made for alternative service. So it was very difficult, especially in those first few years, for men to claim conscientious objector status because they had no alternative means for serving their country. So the process of applying for CO status, which was a postponement of your military training, essentially. The process in Canada differed from province to province, but generally in Western Canada, that meant young men had to appear before a judge. And that judge would be there to judge whether they were sincere in their beliefs in conscientious objection against war. And so a lot of Mennonite young men who claimed CO status appeared before these judges. Often the judges were very harsh and rough. They wanted men to join the military. Canada did have need for men to join the army at that point. Germany was winning the war. They were taking over Europe at that point, and European countries were falling. And so Canada, as Britain's main ally at that point, needed young men to join. So judges were fairly harsh of the young men claiming CO status. Some of them, especially before alternative service, were imprisoned for their beliefs. When alternative service was made to be an option for people in 1941, there were alternative means that they could fulfill their service to the country. The first 3 alternative service camps that opened, one of those first 3 was the Riding Mountain National Park, and so that's where this sawmill comes from. So provision for alternative service was made in May 1941, and the camp at Riding Mountain opened up in July of 1941, and that's when the first group of men arrived. They milled lumber for a number of projects within the national park, and actually, interestingly enough, they milled the lumber that was required to construct the prisoner of war camp. That also was in the boundaries of the national park itself, where German POWs were held. So that's the history of the sawmill here. It speaks to the history of conscientious objectors in Canada and the Mennonite connection there, and the strong peace inclination that still existed in World War II among Mennonites in Canada.
Well, thanks for watching and being a part of this. Just remember that this Saturday, February 13th, we're going to be having the Winter Carnival at the museum. We're excited to be able to be open to the public in a limited way, but taking safety measures into account. But look forward to seeing you there. Hopefully it won't be too terribly cold, but even if it is, we're going to have some fires and some other ways to keep warm. And so look forward to seeing many of you there. Bring your families, come skating, tobogganing. There's going to be some snow carving, etc. And enjoy a meal by our Ladies Auxiliary. The other thing is, if you'd like to see certain segments of the museum featured on these shows, please leave us a comment and or email us, and we'd gladly try to fit that in as best as we can. And so looking forward to hearing back from some of you as to what you think, what segments should we continue with. Are there any other ideas that you have or places around the museum that you'd like to see? So hope you've enjoyed that, and remember to share this with as many people as possible to get the word out about the museum, to hit that subscribe button, and that way you'll be notified every time that we upload another video. There's also a little bell that you can click. Like this if you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you next week.